The 26th of March, 2024, 1:24 a.m. Inside the cargo ship Dali, somewhere between the Baltimore port and the open ocean, the lights flickered, then went dark. The ship, 984 feet long, carrying 4,700 containers, weighing 213 million pounds, was drifting without power toward the Francis Scott Key Bridge. The crew tried to restart the generators. Nothing. They radioed a mayday. At 1:27 a.m., Maryland police stopped traffic at both ends of the bridge. At 1:28 a.m., 90 seconds after the power failed, the Dali struck Pier 17. 6 seconds later, a 1.5 miles of steel truss bridge collapsed into the Patapsco River. 8 men were on that bridge. 6 of them, highway workers filling potholes in the middle of the night, fell into the water. 2 survived. 6 did not. This is a story of how a bridge that stood for 47 years collapsed in moments, how a single loose wire, one connection among thousands, brought down a structure designed to last generations, and how the system's meant to protect us. Bridge assessments, ship redundancies, worker notifications failed at every critical juncture. The National Transportation Safety Board released its final report in November 2025. Their conclusion: this was preventable. But prevention requires seeing risks we've chosen to ignore. The invisible wire. The Dali was massive, almost 1,000 feet long. As long as the Eiffel Tower is tall. Inside its hull, miles of electrical wiring, thousands of connections, circuit breakers, transformers, backup generators, and somewhere deep in that maze of cables, a single wire wasn't seated properly. When the ship was built, a worker placed a label on a signal wire, a small sticker identifying what the wire powered. Nothing unusual, standard procedure, except the label was positioned incorrectly. It sat right where the wire needed to insert into a terminal block spring clamp gate. The wire couldn't fully connect. The connection was intermittent. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Over a decade of vibrations, movement, salt, air, the wire gradually loosened. On March 26th, as the Dali left Baltimore Harbor, the wire disconnected. The circuit breaker tripped. Power cut to most of the ship's systems. Lights out, propulsion gone, steering dead. NTSB chairwoman Jennifer Homendy described the investigative challenge. Finding the single wire was like hunting for a loose rivet on the Eiffel Tower. But they found it, and when they simulated the failure, the wire disconnected again, the same way, the same result. One wire, one label, one connection. That's all it took to set the cascade in motion. The cascade. When the Dali lost power at 1:24 a.m., the crew reacted quickly. They identified the tripped breaker within seconds. Power came back on in 58 seconds. But the ship's diesel generators, critical for propulsion, needed fuel, and the pump supplying that fuel had shut off during the blackout. This wasn't the ship's main service pump. It was a flushing pump designed to clean fuel lines during maintenance, not to run continuously. The crew had been using it as a service pump for at least 7 months. Synergy Marine Group, the ship's operator, had failed to stop this practice. When the power cut, the flushing pump stopped, and it couldn't restart automatically. Someone had to go down 2 levels below, in near total darkness, flashlight in hand, from the engine control deck to the purifier room and manually restart it. By the time a crew member reached the pump, the generators had run out of fuel in their lines. At 1:26 a.m., the Dali experienced a second blackout. This time, restoration took longer. The emergency diesel generator designed to kick in automatically was delayed. A radiator damper didn't open fast enough. The system waited. 70 seconds passed before backup power connected. By then, the ship was 3 ship lengths from the bridge, roughly 2,900 feet, drifting at 7.7 knots. The pilots dropped the port anchor. They radioed a mayday. They tried everything within their limited time window to regain control. It wasn't enough. At 1:28 and 36 seconds a.m., the Dali's bow struck Pier 17, the southern support pier for the bridge's main span. At 1:28 and 42 seconds a.m., 6 seconds after impact, the entire central section of the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed. The workers? There were 8 people on the bridge when it fell. 7 highway workers, a maintenance crew from Bronner Builders, filling potholes. They worked nights when traffic was minimal, standard road maintenance, routine work. 1 inspector walking the span, checking the crew's progress. When the Mayday call came in at 1:26 a.m., the Maryland Transportation Authority police immediately stopped traffic at both bridge entrances. Cars were turned back, no new vehicles entered. The inspector had exchanged cell phone numbers with MDTA officers, but when the emergency happened, no one called him, no warning, no evacuation order. He was walking the bridge when he heard the impact. He ran, made it to the nearest surviving span just as the section behind him collapsed. He survived. The highway workers were in their trucks, parked in the work zone. When the bridge fell, the vehicles tumbled into the Patapsco River. The NTSB calculated the timeline. Had the workers been notified at the same time as police when the mayday was received, at 1:26 a.m., they would have had 1 minute and 29 seconds to evacuate before Pier 17 collapsed. One worker, Julio Cervantes Suarez, survived because his truck had manual windows. When it hit the water, he rolled down the window and escaped. His lawyer later noted he survived because his window was manual. You can imagine how frightening that is. The 6 who died: Alejandro Hernandez Fuentes, 35, Dorlean Ronial Castillo Cabrera, 26, Maynor Yasir Suazo Sandoval, 38, Carlos Hernandez, 24, Miguel Angel Luna Gonzalez, 49, Jose Minor Lopez, 35. Immigrant workers: men who came to the United States for better opportunities, men working night shifts to keep Maryland's roads safe. One widow told CBS News months later, "The only thing I would love for people to know is that for me, my husband is a hero alongside his 5 coworkers. They were there so this country can have better streets." The bridge that was never assessed. The Francis Scott Key Bridge opened in March 1977. At the time, it was the second longest bridge in the Baltimore area. A 1.6-mile continuous truss span carrying Interstate 695 over the Patapsco River. It was designed to 1,977 standards. Back then, the largest container ships visiting Baltimore carried about 3,000 TEUs, 20-foot equivalent. But by 2024, the Port of Baltimore had transformed. In the 2000s, when the Panama Canal announced expansion plans, Maryland officials saw opportunity. They dredged the harbor deeper. They installed massive cranes. They prepared to accommodate vessels up to 14,000 TEU ships that wouldn't fit through the old canal. The Dali carried 10,000 TEUs, 3 times larger than ships the bridge was designed for. And the bridge's protection system, still 1,977 vintage. In 1991, the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, AASHTO, updated its guidelines. After the 1980 Sunshine Skyway Bridge collapse in Florida, where a ship struck a pier and killed 35 people, AASHTO recommended that all bridges over navigable waters undergo vulnerability assessments. Bridge owners should evaluate what happens if a ship strikes this pier, what countermeasures are needed. But there was a catch: grandfather clause. Existing bridges weren't required to comply. New bridges had to meet the standards. Old ones could stay as they were. The Francis Scott Key Bridge fell into that gap. The Maryland Transportation Authority never conducted the recommended vulnerability assessment. The NTSB's final report was blunt. Had the MDTA assessed the Key Bridge as AASHTO recommended, they would have discovered the bridge was almost 30 times above the threshold of risk for catastrophic collapse from a vessel strike. 30 times. Countermeasures existed. Protective islands, deeper dolphins, bollard systems, structures that could absorb or deflect a ship's impact before it reached the main pier. None were implemented. Instead, MDTA spent decades focused on other threats. After the 11th of September 2001, they studied how terrorists might attack the bridge. They monitored for structural flaws like those that caused the 2007 I-35W Mississippi River Bridge collapse in Minnesota, but they didn't assess ship collision risks, even though the port was growing, even though ships were getting bigger, even though the waterway beneath the bridge was one of the busiest shipping channels on the East Coast. The NTSB concluded the lack of countermeasures to protect the bridge contributed directly to the collapse and loss of life. The economic cascade: when the Key Bridge collapsed, it didn't just fall into the river. It fell across the Dali's bow. Portions of the span, the deck, the truss, thousands of tons of steel landed on the ship's forward containers. The wreckage blocked the channel. The Port of Baltimore, the 9th largest port in the United States, handling over 52 million tons of cargo annually, couldn't operate. Ships couldn't enter, ships couldn't leave. For 11 weeks, Baltimore's port was effectively closed. Maryland Governor Wes Moore called it a global crisis. More than 8,000 jobs were immediately affected. The economic impact, an estimated $15 million per day. Automotive companies that relied on Baltimore to import vehicles scrambled to reroute, sugar shipments diverted. The port had handled 444,000 cruise passengers and $80 billion in cargo in 2023. All of that stopped. Highway traffic snarled. The Key Bridge carried 34,000 vehicles daily, including 3,000 trucks. Many of those trucks carried hazardous materials barred from Baltimore's harbor tunnels. They now had to detour around the entire port region, adding hours to delivery times. Small businesses near the bridge suffered. Restaurants that relied on commuters saw traffic vanish. Trucking companies faced delays. The ripple effects spread across the East Coast supply chain. It took until June 2024 to clear enough wreckage to reopen a limited shipping channel. Full operations resumed later in the summer. The damage to the Dali, over $18 million. Cargo damages, undetermined. And the bridge? Initial replacement cost estimates, $1.7 to $1.9 billion. By late 2025, those estimates had doubled, $4.3 to $5.2 billion. The original bridge cost $60 million to build in 1977, about $311 million in 2024 dollars. Rebuilding will cost nearly 17 times that amount. Construction is scheduled to begin in January 2025. The new bridge is expected to open in late 2028, nearly 5 years after the collapse. And this time it will be built with modern vessel collision protections. Systems that could have been added to the old bridge, systems that were recommended decades ago. The question of prevention. The NTSB issued 21 safety recommendations following the collapse to ship operators. Implement automatic control modes for electrical breakers. Stop using flushing pumps as service pumps. Ensure backup systems can actually back up. To bridge owners, conduct vulnerability assessments. Implement motorist warning systems that can activate when a ship reports an emergency. Develop short-term risk reduction strategies while long-term protections are built. To regulatory agencies, require redundancy in large single-engine vessels. Update standards for communication to highway workers in active work zones. The recommendations are detailed, specific, actionable, but here's what the NTSB can't mandate. Priority, the MDTA had decades to assess the key bridge. AASHTO recommended it in 1991. They reiterated in 2009. The guidance was clear. The tools existed. But infrastructure assessments compete with other demands. Budgets are finite. Risks feel abstract until they're not. Baltimore chose to prepare for terrorism, a visible, politically salient threat. Ship collisions despite the 1,980 Sunshine Skyway disaster, despite the growing size of vessels, despite the busiest shipping season in port history, stayed in the background. And on the Dali, operational shortcuts compounded over time. The flushing pump misuse went undetected. The wire label was installed wrong a decade ago and never caught. The breakers were set to manual when automatic would have been better. None of these failures alone would have caused the collapse, but together, in sequence, they became catastrophic. 6 seconds. The actual collapse took 6 seconds from the moment the Dali struck Pier 17 to the moment the last section of truss fell into the river. 47 years of service, 6 seconds to destruction. The bridge had been inspected in 2021 and 2023. Both times it was rated in satisfactory condition. Structurally, it was sound, but satisfactory assumed the bridge would only face the threats it was designed for: wind, traffic loads, age-related wear, not a 213 million pound container ship striking a support pier at 7.7 knots. The NTSB's final words in their November 2025 report: this tragedy should have never occurred. Lives should have never been lost. As with all accidents we investigate, this was preventable. Not through hindsight, through foresight. Through the assessments that were recommended but never conducted. Through the redundancies that could have been built but weren't. Through the communication systems that existed but didn't activate. In November 2025, the NTSB sent letters to 30 bridge owners across the United States whose bridges also span navigable waters with large vessel traffic. The message: conduct your vulnerability assessment. Evaluate your risks. Don't wait for a collapse to discover what could have been done. All 30 have responded. Some have completed assessments. Some are in progress. Some discovered, like Baltimore would have, that their bridges are vulnerable. The question is whether those discoveries lead to action, whether countermeasures get funded, whether the next vulnerability assessment prevents the next collapse, or whether we wait for another bridge to fall in 6 seconds.